Hello everyone, today I want to talk about a certain character from Final Fantasy XIV Online. If you have not yet finished Shadowbringers or Endwalker, I recommend that you stop the video right now and back out as fast as you can. But if you have finished both Shadowbringers and Endwalker, please stick around to dive into the character Grahatia. I'd like to begin this first with a quote from Grahatia. "The future is where my destiny lies." This quote really defines him as a person and really encapsulates some of the struggle that he goes through. So just keep that in mind as we look into his character and consider all of the interesting nuggets of information that we have about him. So let's first begin with his family background. Grahatia is a Mikote, but he comes from the specific species, the Seeker of the Sun. Now his family actually has quite a long history, but not all of it is necessarily cataloged in any real way. However, there are stories of an ancient forebear, an ancestor if you will, called Desh. This Mikote was an aide to Princess Selena, who was one of the royalty of the Allegan Empire. Now, what we do know is that Mikote were used by the Allegans as slaves, and therefore Desh was more than likely born into a slave family, but over time he was able to work upwards through the army, and he was conscripted in the army, and he worked his way up. He was promoted until he became an aide to Princess Selena and was more than likely her lover. Now, Princess Selena knew the hopes and dreams of her people and how they really wanted to keep the Crystal Tower going as hope for the future. And so Desh was basically instilled with the blood and power of the Allegan royalty through Allegan technology. He survived the Fourth Umbral Calamity, and his tribe, the G tribe, elected to remain in Corvos to protect Allegan technology from being misused. You could almost imagine the G tribe as being like the Ronkin Vieira tribe. So the G tribe currently lives in the land of Corvos, which is now renamed Locus Aminus, which means pleasant place. Currently, Locus Aminus, or Corvos, is under Garlean rule, and Corvos used to actually, in fact, be the original home country of the Garleans. Now we know that the Garleans were pushed out of that and forced north, so you do have to kind of ask how much of the ostracization of the Garleans happened from the Mikote race. It's a good question. However, currently, what we do know is that this region is now back under Garlean rule, and according to Graha, the Mikote tribes, the G tribe, is in an ongoing state of semi-rebellion. Now, Graha himself was one of the few who gained the Allegan Eye, which pointed to him having more of the Allegan royal blood than normal. And since the town next door was taken by the House Darnus, his tribe was very concerned because the House Darnus were obsessed with uncovering the secrets of Allag. So basically the tribe decided to give up on the tradition of protecting the ruins of the Allegan Empire in any definitive way, and part of this was to give up their son to Sharlayan scholars for safekeeping. And since that time, Graha hasn't returned back to Corvos. Since he does not seem to remember much of Corvos, we can probably assume that he was given away probably around 6 years of age. And what is also very clear is that the tribe themselves seem to be worried that House Darnus would do something to Graha. So we have to just conjecture here Did the tribe give Graha away because he was too much of a risk, or did they give him away because they loved him very much? I think we will find the answer to that in the upcoming patches / expansions. Now let's go in for some basic info. So Graha, in A Realm Reborn, when we first meet him, is 24 years old. And as of 5.0, he was around 124, but if we include 200 years of sleeping in the Crystal Tower, at one point he aged to 324 years. But the Graha of Endwalker, as we know now, is in a 24-year-old body with about 124 years total of memory. For his height, he is the minimum height for a Mikote male. So if you're making him in the character creator, you got to slide that slider all the way down to 0. And according to some external sites, this puts Graha at a cute little 5 foot 2 inches. But his tail is quite long, so you'll need to push that slider right up to 100. So he has a full length Mikote tail, which some of you may have noticed. I may have noticed. Now he has 2 tattoos. The Archon mark on his neck shows that he has done his thesis and received the Archon's Thesis stamp of approval. So he is technically a Sharlayan sage. He has an arm tattoo on his shoulder, which is more linked to the Scions. So a lot of people were saying, well, why does he have a Scion tattoo when he was part of the students of Baldician? The reality was, if you read some of the lore, the students of Baldician were incredibly supportive of the Scions, even though Sharlayan had a non-interference policy. The students were very, very invested in the Scions' commitment. And so from a distance, many of them wanted to join the Scions, and you can totally see a young Graha wanting to be part of, a heroic endeavor. But because of Sharlayan policies and politics, many students of Baldician could only show their support really with a tattoo and doing odd stuff for friends. His past job, when we first meet him, is an archer. Some people say he's a bard, but there's no indication that he has a harp on him or any kind of instrument. But for sure, we definitely know that he was an archer. And his current jobs are paladin, white mage, and black mage. Some people call him a gray mage. What we do know for sure is that Graha is considered an all-rounder, and that's why he can take any role in Trust. And the special characteristic, of course, is his red eyes. He had one red eye in A Realm Reborn and got the second one during the Crystal Tower arc. And this is an indication that his genetics hold a stronger tie to the Allegan royalty. Now, according to him, only one child per generation gets the eye, and he seemed to imply in Endwalker that it was the eldest son. Now, this raises a whole bunch of questions. If a Noon has a harem, let's say of 5 women, is Graha the eldest of all of the children of those 5 women, or is he simply the eldest boy of one of those women? It's a good question that hopefully we can answer in the future. As for his education, once again, he was educated in Sharlayan, and he actually became an Archon. His thesis was Allegan civilization as depicted in folklore. So he was essentially an anthropological literary analyst. Now, he was convinced by the students of Baldician to get the thesis done for an Archon mark, so that he could access the library and read forbidden tomes. Now, the Archon mark and the Archon thesis could be considered to be like a PhD, whereas Alphino and Alice only did a thesis for the studium, which could be considered more like a BA. According to Graha, he did not attend the studium. Why not? Was it because it was too expensive? It's possible, because you definitely get a feel that Graha is on a lower financial bracket than many of the other scions. It's also very possible that he had a lot of commitments to the students of Valdesian because Cryal's grandfather, Galif, was his mentor and potentially was actually the Charlayan scholar who took him in. Plus, on top of that, he had a lot of work with the Sons of Koinak. So it's very possible that G'raha ended up really not having the time or just not being financially able to go to the studium. And so he kind of skipped 2 levels and went straight for that Archon Thesis, which in my opinion makes him really cool. A lot of G'raha's investigation focused on Allagan stuff, like the Empire and everything. And this was because, of course, he was really, really invested in finding out the mysteries linked to his eye. And this, of course, comes to fruition in the Crystal Tower arc. In terms of personality, in A Realm Reborn, G'raha is playful, outgoing, and adventurous, and he has a little bit of an attitude. He's kind of sassy. In Shadowbringers, he is more determined, quiet, and the mystery of his personality is such that you kind of get this feeling like he's putting on an act to a certain degree. He certainly is sad and troubled, right? Like he's going in thinking he's going to die. So there is a weight to G'raha that actually evaporates pretty quickly after his life is saved and Emet-Selch is vanquished. It becomes increasingly clear that G'raha is not going to be able to give up his life for the Scions as he had planned, and so I think we start to see him relaxing a little bit. And so by the time he merges with his younger self, we get a mixture of him being playful and kind of youthful, but at the same point in time he has these moments where he is incredibly mature and thoughtful and wise, to the point where even Estinian could notice that G'raha has this age within him. But at the same point in time, there's a part of him that is really fighting to remain youthful and to pursue these dreams he's always had. G'raha, in general, is really a straightforward guy, but he does tend to have these moments of secretness where he's engaging in double wordplay or like in games. So like he meets the Warrior of Light at first as just a voice, right? He's hiding somewhere and he's trying to set out clues and challenge the Warrior of Light. But we know that he really wants a connection with you, the Warrior of Light. So by the time Shadowbringer comes around, he's having these conversations where he's talking about you, but he can't come out and talk about you. And so it's wonderful to go back and listen to some of those conversations, because you realize he really, really wanted to be upfront with you and to really be there present as G'raha and not the Crystal Exarch. And various things held him back from that. And so I would say that overall G'raha's personality is one that is extremely loyal and thoughtful and often comes at the cost of himself. Now, some little known facts about G'raha. Let's just go through them. One of the things that you might not know is that G'raha was bullied by the other Mikote children in Corvos because of his red eye. And he says something to the effect that children can be cruel. All that he remembers of his home, Corvos, is flying carpets. We can also kind of guess that G'raha wasn't as wealthy as some of the other Archons that we know. He is very cheap with his food, and therefore he never ate at the Last Stand, never had their hamburger until Endwalker. His switch to magic use makes him hungry all the time. And he learned the levitation spell because he was too short to reach the books on the shelf without the use of the platform. G'raha also mentioned that he likes to sit outside and read until the sun falls. So we can extrapolate from that G'raha really loves the outdoors. And the fact that he really housed for the most part on the Isle of Val. If anyone has done any of the Eureka stuff, you could think of it as being this really beautiful wilderness, but it's not a heavily populated city. Finally, G'raha has a beautiful singing voice, He prefers to sing traditional songs passed down through his family. I am hoping that in the future we might be able to hear what this might sound like. Some other interesting things to note that came up in my research. According to Curlfist from Tumblr, she chose Thaliak the Scholar as his patron deity when she was making a Grahatia alt. Not only did she choose this because he is the patron deity of Sharlayan and is a scholar, but also because his mark is found in Mordona, overlooking the Crystal Tower from Wraithfrost. So that's an interesting connection. Another interesting connection is that Grahatia names the Crystal Tower investigation team Noah. Now, this name refers to two things. Number one, a Final Fantasy III character called Noah, and number two, a biblical character that it is based on. And all of these three characters, from the Bible, from Final Fantasy III, and of course Graha, they all share the same thematic story. They save lives during a flood and help perpetuate civilization. Now, the Noah or flood myth is actually a worldwide myth in many cultures. So Graha, in a sense, is actually tied to something fundamentally important to the human experience. It's something that has been on the minds of a lot of people over the past thousands of years. And this, in my opinion, makes Graha a very powerful figure on a mythological level. According to the Graha wiki, in Final Fantasy III, a character called Desh recovers his memory inside the Tower of Owen, realizing he's the last of the people who built the tower. So he remains inside and seemingly dies, but he actually repairs it and prevents an earthquake. In the same kind of way, in Final Fantasy XIV, Graha also discovers his memories, his hidden memories, in the Crystal Tower, which was initially lost in an earthquake. And he too remains inside the tower, puts himself to sleep in order to control it. Now, according to Wiki as well, in Heaven on High, you can learn more about Princess Selena and Desh's story. This is where it is believed that Princess Selena was in love with Desh. Now, it's also very highly recommended that you show Grahatia your wind-up minions, both the original Grahatia version and the Exarch one. His response to both of them, they're both really cute responses. Finally, Graha has a dense soul. So the current theory is that, like the Warrior of Light, he has been rejoined 8 times. Now, the Warrior of Light rejoined by joining up with Ardbert, whereas Graha was rejoined because basically the one self that lived through the Umbral Calamity was rejoined for an 8th time, and it has melded with the new Graha. So it's very possible that the new Graha, just like the Crystal Exarch, has a denser soul than other people on the source. Thematic importance. Hope versus despair plays a huge role in Graha's story. To begin with, if you replay the Crystal Tower arc, you are struck by the early refrain of the theme that is brought to fruition in Endwalker, hope and despair. His decision in the Crystal arc is to fulfill the hope of the Alligans, Princess Selena, and his own people. And he is doing so at the cost of his own future. But he wants to carry forward that hope into the future, just like people in the past carried hope forward. His decision in Shadowbringers is to fulfill the hope of the future Ironworks people, and to create hope for the source by saving the Warrior of Light from Black Rose. So once again, we have Graha, sacrificing his own personal goals in order to fulfill the hope of these people who were fighting against despair, against a world that was filled with evil, and he represents this hopeful, forward-looking gaze. And finally, of course, in Endwalker, we are once again hit by Graha's connection to hope. He intends to fulfill the hope of the entire world, just like the other Scions, and gives himself up with, no very real awareness that he could be saved. And once again, his interaction with the Omicron as he's giving himself up is in fact giving them hope. Unlike Y'shtola and Oriange, who were just simply standing and saying, we're too stubborn to give up, there's too much out there for us to make life not worth living. Like, They were fighting for knowledge, they were fighting for curiosity. And in the case of, for example, Thancred gave himself up out of love, really. And Estinian, his challenge to the dragon was about not giving up, of course, and not giving in to despair, but it felt still more of a challenge. Whereas G'raha's interaction with the Omicron was one of someone who was really trying to give hope back to a people who had lost all sense of emotion or humanity. And that interaction, combined with the music and combined with everything else, I think was so meaningful to people that most streamers and most viewers, if they hadn't cried up until then, usually started crying or started feeling more emotional during that moment. Why was that? Well, part of it is because there is another fascinating thing that's going on when it comes to G'raha. It's about self-sacrifice and stoicism. Like Vanna said, you have to look and find joy even when darkness descends. So it's about hope, but it's about how do you practically move forward in hope when things are looking really dire. I started to think about what made G'raha Tia push forward in the face of despair. I wondered what drove him to give himself up for the cause. Like most scions, I think G'raha Tia was ready to die for the rest of the world. But I started wondering about G'raha Tia in particular. So in the Crystal Tower, G'raha immediately responds and is sensitive to the wishes of the ancients. These are people he barely knew, but he was still willing to put his life on hold and give up the chance for adventure in order to make their dreams come true for the good of the future as well. And this theme in G'raha's life, or this habit, shall we say, crops up again in Shadowbringers, where he sacrifices himself again and again. He once again puts his life on hold to go back in time across space to the First, where he's faced with a century-long wait. He fuses with the tower at cost to himself, all of this to fulfill the mission the people of the post-8th Calamity Sword tasked him with, and he was willing to die for the Warrior of Light, if only to ensure a better future for all the realms. And then finally in Endwalker, just like all the other scions, G'raha Tia steps forward and offers himself and his will in order to pave the way for the Warrior of Light. And he does so without expecting to be saved, but is still hopeful that the future he worked to achieve will happen. And we also find out that he's been shipped off to Sharlayan as a young child, probably, like I said, around 6 to 8 years old. And I can't help but think that might have been the source of his innate self-sacrifice. If you think about it, at a young age, he carried the burden of the Allegheny, and he understood the charge his father gave him. And he had to live with the fact that his family basically were like, yeah, your eye is just too much for us to carry. You gotta go. And so to a certain degree, this was another sacrifice that G'raha had to make for the good of other people. This is something that G'raha has always carried with him. Yet, I would say that G'raha doesn't give you a sense of doom and gloom. The energy of his sacrifice is almost always joyous to a certain degree. That is to say, it's not that he's just shrugging it off and he's like, oh, it's just a flesh wound, but I would say that he isn't necessarily a grim character. He embraces what he has to do with this kind of acceptance and love, which is really impactful. Because unlike others who have given their life to the work, G'raha represents someone who has his own dreams, but gives up those real dreams to do the right thing. I always get the feeling with Y'shtola, for example, that she works with the Scions because basically what they want is aligning with her personal interests. You never get the feeling like her desires and the desires of the Scions are at a severe odds. And most of Y'shtola's struggles are with people just being stupid. With Thancred, aside from Minfilia, Thancred has always been on board. You never felt like his life was taking a hit because he was a Scion. In fact, you could say his life got for the better because he was part of them. Probably the most that we see with Thancred is having to give up Minfilia. But generally speaking, Urianger, Thancred, Y'shtola, even the twins seem to be kind of married to their role to a certain degree. with only Estinian and Graha being people who have to kind of be brought into the fold. And with Graha, he embraces it, and he's, you know, he's like, oh, I don't know if you guys really want me, but if you guys want me, I'm happy to be here. Estinian had to be dragged in, kicking and screaming pretty much. But what is really sad is that you get the feeling when Graha gives himself up in Endwalker that he's doing so at his own cost to a certain degree. And you can tell because he asked the Warrior of Light to promise him some things. And those promises, I think, point to dreams that Graha always had. He has things he still wants to do. And we don't really get that from any of the other Scions. And that's really specific to Graha. That's where I think Graha's self-sacrifice hits hard, because we actually understand what he's giving up. He's been giving up his dreams, and he's been fighting against a lot of issues, but at the same point in time, he is not sitting around feeling sorry for himself or, you know, just crying or whatever. He is probably what I would call stoic. Now, what is Stoicism? Stoicism has a bit of a bad rap nowadays, but I'm here to tell you that Stoicism is not about being emotionless. It's actually a way to look at yourself and the world. It's a philosophy that helps you overcome overwhelming challenges in your life and empowers you to help others. The basic virtues of Stoicism include courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. In the case of courage, this is not the absence of fear, but it's acting while you are afraid. And I think we can definitely say Graha can check that one right off the list. Temperance is doing the right thing in the right amount in the right way. For the most part, I would say Graha also has this down. There is a couple times where he is overexerting himself. And so this is where we can kind of see a character flaw that he has to struggle with. And that's something I want to talk about in another video. But for the most part, we can say that this new Graha in Endwalker, who is starting to be honest about what he wants from life, is definitely moving to a place where he's not going to exert himself overly much. He's going to learn how to do things the right way at the right time. Justice. This is the source of all virtues, is advocating for justice. And I definitely think that Graha is a very moral and upright person in general. He did lie in Shadowbringers, but it was because he understood that the Scions would basically not allow him to sacrifice himself if necessary. And when the Scions found out who he was, sure enough, he was not allowed to sacrifice himself. So while Graha is fairly moral and definitely has a strong sense of justice in how he ruled the people of the Crystarium, that does not mean that he's, of course, you know, incapable of making poor decisions. And finally, of course, linked to this is wisdom. So this is the idea that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We have to learn to listen and learn. And I definitely feel like Graha is really good at that. He's not aggressive or acting before thinking like Alice is. And he is not as immature in that sense as Alphino was with the Crystal Braves. So what we could probably say is that the Grahatia problems are in other areas of his life, but in these areas he's really checking off quite a few boxes, in my opinion. And this is why Graha is amazing. He represents an emotionally intelligent person who is competent and reliable. He's loyal, he's self-sacrificing, and he's someone you want to have on your side in a crisis. When they gave him the role of all-rounder in the trust system, I felt that was so thematically true, because he's really there for you as much as he can be, and in this very humble kind of way. And so to me, he represents this joyous masculinity that most females respond to. And I feel like regardless of his size or his race, I think a lot of people can respect Graha because of this. He is not whiny, but he isn't afraid to show his tears. He can turn on his Exarch mode and become a leader, and that's what makes him so fascinating, because he's someone who is struggling with parts of himself, but at the same point in time, he's not giving up. And all of this points to why, when it's his time to sacrifice himself in Endwalker, his air quote death is where most streamers break down. And it's not just the music. I think for most streamers, the sacrifices of the first 4 felt very important, and I actually saw some streamers break down over Estinian because he was their husbando. But I really think that for the most part, a lot of streamers were in denial for the first 4. But once that denial phase kind of hit, they came in with this Graha death. And even if you knew in your head that this was all going to be reversed, you could feel the impact. And I think the reason why you could feel this impact is because he is new to the Scions. His adventure is just starting. He's so young, he's so good-hearted, and he's already sacrificed so much. So too many people, even if they weren't super Graha fans, they did feel something there. And I think it's because Graha represents this kind of selfless yet joyous personhood that I think many of us want to be around, if not want to be, you know? And that's why he is best boy of Final Fantasy XIV, really. I'd like to end the quote with, "It is those with an unyielding will who define the course of history." And I think that kind of also is a great summation of Graha. Even though he struggles a lot, even though he's struggled with despair and finding hope and regaining his dreams, Graha has not given up. And I am very excited to find out where the story will take him and us next. So if you want to talk more about Graha in the comments, leave some comments below. I will probably be talking about some other details about Graha's personality in another video, but this is just an overall info dump for those who want to know more about Graha. And I will leave you with that for now. Have a great day.